We want to welcome you to our webinar on developing a teacher's toolkit for film and video production. Some people have asked me what a toolkit is, and for the purposes of this webinar and just general thought, your toolkit is just anything you're using in the class. So whether that's another software, whether that's a piece of hardware, whether that's a really good communication tool, a sort of flow chart that you share with your students, anything that you're using to help you instruct your students in film and video production, we consider part of your toolkit. So just to move on, just to let you know about our agenda today. So we're now in our housekeeping and introduction stage pretty much. I do have a couple of updates to give you on Celtx that are of interest to our education clients in particular. Then we're going to have a little quick icebreaker, and then we're going to get into our panelist discussion. I'll be introducing the panelists shortly, but we're basically going to do a roundtable discussion with some questions to them about how they're managing toolkits in their classrooms. And then at the end of our webinar, this is the first time we've done this, but we are actually opening it up for a half hour of discussion and questions. So we're going to see how that goes. You guys are our guinea pigs this time. We have been finding that with a lot of our webinars, we're running out of question time towards the end. So we wanted to give you that extra time to ask everything you want to ask and make sure that we're addressing any of the things that you want to share, especially. And we do also obviously realize that this is a very strange time for everyone, and being able to network with peers is just helpful for all of us. So just in terms of housekeeping, you should all be muted when you joined the webinar. You should have come in muted. If for any reason you are not, please make sure your microphone is muted. During the webinar, we ask that you avoid asking questions as much as possible. Obviously, sometimes something comes up. If you have a question for the presenters, the panelists, please use the Q&A feature, and we'll make sure that they get those questions. If you have sort of general commentary for that you want to direct to everyone who's attending the webinar today, as well when we do our icebreaker session, I'll ask you to use the chat window at the bottom of your Zoom window. All of you are teachers and are probably using Zoom, so you probably know where to find this. But if anybody has any issues, let us know through the Q&A if you can't access the chat. We will try to get to all of your questions. Obviously, sometimes we do run out of time. If we do have that list of questions, so we will follow up afterwards. And the only thing I would say is that your questions should be related to the webinar, and anything related to using Celtx itself, support-related questions are best sent to our support team using support@celtx.com. So who we are. I am the host of this webinar today. I'm Dara Squires, and we have Nicole who's helping with the hosting, and she'll also be helping monitor the Q&A. And then we also have Junior, whose headshot I didn't get in time, but you'll see his lovely face in a moment. And he is on our support team and will also be moderating the chat in our webinar. In terms of our panelists, we have Erik from Paris. He's at the American School in Paris, and he's a filmmaking teacher in the international, I'm going to just say IB program because I always mispronounce the baccalaureate part. We have Anna, who's a digital video teacher at the Science and Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. And then we have Jami, who's a professor at the film program here at Memorial University of Newfoundland. For those of you who are wondering, Celtx is located in Newfoundland, Canada, and Jami is a local here as well. They will be introducing themselves further in just a moment. In terms of Celtx updates, we did want to let you know about a couple of changes that if you're a Celtx user, you may have noticed already. If you haven't and you want more information about them, definitely reach out to us after the webinar. So one of the things that we have done is we have gone ahead and improved your student management. We've made some changes to how you add members, as well as privacy for students. So students no longer see your membership window and don't see each other's email addresses. We've also added an offline mode to our scripts. Obviously, with the COVID protocols, with some of our schools being online only, and with some students working at home with not always reliable internet, we thought that it was important to make sure that all students had access to using offline mode for scripts. So with offline mode, they were able to take their script offline when they don't have reliable internet, work on it offline, and then when they have reliable internet again, they can upload it back again online by going online. We also did want to let you know that we had run a webinar back in July on teaching script writing online. And I'll make sure that all of you get a link to that recording after this webinar. And as well, we have a great series called the Fundamentals series, which is available on our blog as well as our YouTube channel. And this is basically runs through the beginning gamut of learning how to start writing a script, and right up to, Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, the last one was on breakdown, was it not? Yes. So right up to the point of breakdown, it's a very informative and just fun to watch series as well. So now we're at our icebreaker session before we get into our panelists, and I was hoping that each of you could go into the chat window, let us know your name, where you're located, something about the course you teach, whether it's a particular course or a particular program, just what you're teaching. And then if you have a moment, just like name one tool that you're using that you feel is your real go-to tool. So we'll give everyone a minute to answer all of that, and you will all be able to see each other's answers there in your chat window as well.
Cool. Plenty of IB film. That's nice.
Just taking a look at the answers here. This is really great. So what we'll do after the webinar is we will have a transcript of this chat, and I'll make sure that along with the recording, you all get a list of all the tools that everyone is mentioning in case you want to look into those further.
Oh, there's a fellow Brazilian in the chat. That's awesome. That's great.
They're coming in so quick, I can't keep up with them all. Recognizing some of these names. It's really great to see so many of our teachers here today. And I really want to thank you all for attending today. I know this is a strange time, and I know that a lot of our questions are, a lot of you are working really hard to kind of keep things together in your classroom, work with your students in this whole kind of new protocols. And we just really want to express our appreciation to you. As a parent myself, I love my teachers, but I just wanted to let you all know that we really appreciate you all taking part in this today. All right, it looks like we've got just about everyone in there. Oh no, we got some more messages coming in, so I'll just give everyone a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing my screen though, because I think everyone's aware of what the icebreaker is at this point. So stop share. All right. So that's great. video. Oh, that's interesting. You're the second person I've seen mention that, Josh. I'm gonna have to take a look at that. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And for our first question today for our panelists, Erik, I think we'll start with you, then Anna, then Jami. I'll try and change it up for each question. But I was wondering if you could each tell us a little bit about yourself, the class or classes that you teach, and kind of your background and how you got into teaching in film.
Okay, well, so my name is Erik Pessoa. I'm originally from Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. I start teaching international schools. Like I'm an international teacher, meaning that I teach international schools. So I started teaching in the American school in Rio in 2003. By chance, to be sincere, so it was not something that I was like really like, was not a career goal, but the opportunity came up to teach there and start a film program there in Rio. In Brazil is really big because we like one of the biggest Latin American like TV producers is in Rio, like global, and the American School in Rio serves that community. So they really wanted to start this program, and like I had the chance to start there. So after 6 years in Rio, I went to teach. I took one sabbatical year working for a production company in Berlin, then 5 years in Shanghai teaching American school there, the Shanghai Community International School there. And now I'm starting my 6th year here in Paris, the American School of Paris. I always taught high school. Here in Paris for a while, I taught also middle school, 7th and 8th grade filmmaking. And here we offer an interesting blend between like electives filmmaking, which is a semester course. We have an elective filmmaking year course, which is kind of a little bit of the advanced for the kids who already took film. They still want to keep like this part. And we have the IB, the International Baccalaureate. I also struggle to pronounce the baccalaureate, don't worry. So and we also have the International Baccalaureate, which is a 2-year pre-university course here that we blend not only production, which I know is the core of the seminar, but we also teach theory and history of filmmaking. And in the IB program, I'm also an examiner. I've been an examiner already for 6 years. My goodness, more, 8 years. And I'm also the moderator of the official community of the diploma program film aspect from IB. So I think that's it. Like anything like.
That's a pretty impressive resume there, Erik. Erik also runs a great program called Clash of the Titans, which is a sort of a 48-hour type film challenge for students where they actually get to film in Paris. And I know teenage me would have been like just over the moon about that. So that's a really exciting thing that he's doing with his students. Actually, I'm excited about it now.
We invite schools all over the world, normally 5 schools, and they come to Paris. I mean, that was pre-COVID. Come to Paris, and then we have a kind of workshops, and they have this competition where they have to shoot in 48 hours, in less than 48 hours of film, and then is selected by normally a jury of people in the industry, and is shown a movie theater here in Paris. Shoot on location. You have 5 hours in locations with permits and everything else in Paris. It's a cool adventure.
It is very interesting. And if anybody would like to know more about that after the webinar, definitely reach out and we'll share Erik's contact information with you. Anna, if you could go ahead and tell us a bit about yourself and what you're teaching and how you got into teaching film production.
Sure. So I'm the CTE digital video teacher at Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. Some of you I saw in the chat also said you're CTE teachers. If you're not, it stands for Career and Technical Education. It's like a vocational program for students, sort of as a way to help prep them for the industry so that they could leave right after high school and go into industry if they want. Many of our students go on to college, but it's that idea of giving them that hands-on experience to prepare them for a career. Mm-hmm. My background is that I was originally interested in theater. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design for performing arts. And while I was there, I started working on film sets as an actor and helping with casting. And I had a terrible fear of technology. One of the reasons why I didn't want to study film is because it seemed overwhelming, all of the buttons and the jargon. But after I'd been on a film set for a while, it got sort of demystified for me, I guess. I realized that it's all very learnable and the people around me were learning too. So I kind of jumped in, even though I didn't get a degree in film, and started learning more about it while I was still in college. I had no plans to be a teacher. I wrote my college entrance essay on how I would never teach because I was just going to be a real artist. And after after going to college, I learned that I loved teaching, and I left and started a film program in Texas that was kind of a mix of film and art and theater for students who were coming out of jail and juvie back into the high school system. And the program focused on helping them process their stories and build community. And we were using iPads and had no gear. So if any of you are in that boat, I've been in that boat too. And now the program I run, like I said, a CTE program, it's pretty gear intensive. So that's kind of been the journey for me.
That's great. Thanks so much, Anna. I actually wasn't aware of that background in Texas, so it was great to learn that myself. That's awesome. Jami, your turn. So if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, the class that you teach, and your background, how you got into this.
So I'm Jami Skidmore, and I'm here in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, where Celtx is based. I have a diploma in radio and television broadcasting, and I worked in that field for a number of years as an editor, and then I transitioned into theater, and I worked in theater for over 30 years. These days, primarily a puppeteer, but I've done pretty much everything you can do in theater. I direct, I create, I design, I sweep floors, whatever is needed. And but I teach in a program called the Diploma in Stage and Screen Technique. So it's an amalgamation of practical courses in theater and film. And there's obviously a lot of overlap between the two. And about 10 years ago, I started to teach more of a balanced program, really teaching film and the theater courses. And so I started, making a lot of my own films again. I've always made films throughout my life, even when I wasn't as heavily involved in filmmaking, but I started making a lot more, narratives and a lot of music videos and some documentary films as well. And in our program, I've taught every course that we have. We have 7 courses, and but I tend to focus these days on teaching a couple of drama courses or theater courses. I teach one called Producing the Play, where we basically put on I'm based in an English department, where we put in our department's play each year. And I teach a directing course. In some years, I teach it as a balance of theater and film directing, which I think is actually a good approach. Last year, for the first time, I only did it as a theater directing course. And that's because I was also teaching producing the documentary. And there's just too much overlap. If I do 2 film courses at once, I just cover too much of the same material. And I'm currently, one of my current projects is I'm working with a local Shakespeare company. I'm sort of a one-man filming and editing machine. I'm shooting and recording 40 Shakespearean monologues that are going to play over 40 weeks. And the first one was released yesterday.
Oh, was it? Okay. I was following that project, but I didn't realize it was released already. That's good to know. That's really great. And Jami just did a shadow puppet play here, actually, which was really interesting with the COVID protocols. They set it up so it was a drive-in theater style. Really great idea, and made the theater a lot more accessible to people. I was saying earlier to myself that you could kind of pay per car, or there were lawn chairs you could use, and it was all very affordable, which was nice to see. We'll move along. I know that, just to introduce you to everyone, Jami and Anna are both teaching online this semester, and Erik is, fingers crossed, in class. It's kind of determined day by day whether they're going to continue in class, but for now he's been in class. So I'm going to split up this question a little. Erik, I'll start with you again this time. So with the in-class classes, how have you found the social distancing rules have affected the hands-on part of your instruction?
It's an interesting question. It's actually a little bit complicated to answer because, I know that the distance, the social distance, varies according to states, countries, and so on. So my school follows to the letter the protocol of the French government, which tells us screw the social distance.
Okay.
They don't like the social distance is not priority. The priority is masks and sanitizing. So sanitize your hand, sanitize the table, sanitize the equipment. If you can, instead of social distancing, they're asking us to do assigned seats. So my classroom, I have some kind of like long tables that can fold and I can move to the side when I need to do a production. So what I did, I create some like islands inside my classroom, and the students have to sit all like kind of the same island all the time. So that's what we are doing. We have a limit of 22 students per class. I have one class only actually 22 students there this time. And what they have to do, they sanitize their hands when they come in, sanitize the table. When they have to handle equipment, the equipment is I sanitize the equipment before class. They sanitize when they return to me. That's the idea. With that in mind, the most fragile, for example, the cameras nowadays, like at the beginning of the school year too, so they don't handle the fancy cameras, the 4K cameras and so on. So for now, they're using the smartphones, and I have like a DJI Osmo kind of camera. So this is easier to sanitize. It's just like outside and this kind of stuff. So it's a little bit easier to sanitize. So that's for masks, always mask. The only time they don't wear a mask when they're gonna act in front of the camera, then we have the social distance of 2 meters. That's like how it is working for now. And day by day, we receive an email from administration to say that tomorrow we have class or tomorrow we don't have class.
That's got to be a different level of stress at the end of each day. You feel like you're done, and then you're like, okay, do I have to prep to go online tomorrow? Or that's interesting.
To be fair, administration asked us to prepare 2 weeks, like in advance, like in case we go in distance learning, at least we have something to start with.
Right.
And they ask, like I'm the coordinator of the visual arts department at my school. So they ask us also to separate enough equipment according to possibility so the students can take home. So in my case, for example, the only thing that I could, we have some small little lights, LED lights that cost like €5 or something like this, that like I separate already, like in case of emergency, the students can take this. And they can have enough at least for like, I would say the IB class, which is the main one for university and so on.
That's interesting. That's a good preparation there. I'll go to Jami next. So Jami, I know you're teaching online, and did you teach at the end of last semester online as well, or was your class kind of finished up at that stage?
I did a little bit. I was teaching directing and producing the documentary.
Okay.
And but not really anything significant. So we ended up like watching a lot of videos and films and discussing them. So we moved away from the practical elements. This semester, I'm actually not teaching anything practical online. I'm teaching Introduction to Film course, and then I'm doing a grad course on theater and circus. But we do have one, I would have been teaching a theater course this semester, and it would have just been too challenging for our level of students to create it online. Not that it's impossible, it's just that we're a stepping stone program, and a lot of our students have never been on stage before. But we do have one course on Introduction to Filmmaking going on, that is going on online. I can't really speak to that, but I will be teaching producing the documentary in the winter, and I anticipate it will be online. And I'm not too worried about it. You know, currently our province has one active COVID case, so we're in a very lucky state. I don't know if that will continue to be the same in the winter or not, but I'll just mold the documentary filmmaking either around the individual's experiences or the experiences of the individual's bubble.
Right.
Yeah. So, and I'll be able to make some of the gear accessible. I'll talk later about, you know, kind of my toolkit, the most important tools I think the students need. And so, you know, we'll do drop-off points and things like that. I have a cleaning kit as well that I got from a local company, Long and McQuaid. And yes, we're at an island, so that helps. But we're also part of a bubble with what's called Maritime Canada, and in our whole area, I think we have like one COVID case amongst 1.8 million people. So we're pretty lucky.
Yeah, we definitely are. I don't think any of us take it for granted how lucky we are here in Atlantic Canada in particular. And hoping it stays that way. Okay. Anna, for yourself, I think that last semester you kind of just clued up your classes when you had to switch online. So how have you found switching to the online environment for this semester with the new incoming students?
Yeah, last year at our school was an interesting year as a precursor to this year. Our building that we were supposed to be in ended up under construction, and then it became a live asbestos site and was closed. And we were out of it for about 4 months, working in like office spaces as a school. So I kind of got a precursor to how to do film class without access to our regular equipment. But by the time we got to March, I was like, yeah, we're done. This was hard, and it sounds like a great time for you kids to go watch movies and enjoy them, and we'll come back and talk about it next year. So I think I kind of came to this year with the framing questions of how can I make this simple? Not necessarily easy, but just how can I make it simple? And then how can I make this fun? While my class is a class that students commit to, they have my course for about 8 hours a week, so it's twice as much as their English or math or history class. It still is an elective course that if they decide to pursue, they can get more learning in college, or outside of school later. So I feel like it can be a pressure valve, and we're working on simple and fun. So I've stepped away from the film production side of my course, and I'm teaching a unit that I'm calling Applied Film Theory. And basically the students watch a film that embodies some kind of cinematography technique. So our first film we watched was Cloverfield, and we focused on found footage and had a discussion about that and writing and out loud. And then the students used their cell phones at home and whatever pets or siblings they could round up to make a found footage film that was 1 to 3 minutes long. And we just watched them yesterday. And it's the first time I've ever had students make something where I wasn't watching over their shoulders, like as they were editing. And so usually when I see the kids' films, I've really already seen them, and it's just seeing them in a more polished version. But it was kind of fun. It was almost like a film festival premiere of sorts, where we were all blind to each other's films and then we got to enjoy them.
That sounds really fun and exciting for them too. That's part of what keeps it a little bit fun, is that mystery around each other's work, I think. Awesome. Okay, so we'll move on. I guess next I would want to ask you, with your toolkit that you're using now, how long were you teaching how long did it take you to build that toolkit? And how much time do you dedicate to updating it each year? Do you do a lot of research to have to update it for the next year, or do you have some really tried and true tools that you're using over and over again? And I think this time we'll start with you, Jami, to split it up a little.
So again, we're a small program. There's certain things we always use. As a program, we edit on Final Cut Pro X, but we allow our students to use other programs. In my documentary class, I make them subtitle their films, because a lot of our documentary making is aimed at social media these days. And, as we all know, people just kind of flip through their phones, and often without the sound on. So they're most likely to read the text of a video nowadays. So it's good to have both. We use a lot of different cameras. We use some prosumer cameras. We have a campus in the UK in Harlow. So over the years, I've invested in some smaller gear as well, like XA 10s and 30s from Canon. And but a lot of students, and I also bring a lot of my own gear into the class. I have some like Blackmagic cameras with prime lenses, and some like a Micro Four Thirds camera that I bring in, that we play around with, and allows us to, I have a couple of them, so we can do multi-camera shoots and stuff with them. But also just let students use their own cameras as well, whether it's an iPhone or a DSLR. I think it's good for them. One of my premises is that if they want to become, filmmakers, it's a really good idea to go out and make your own films. So I try to make sure that if they have their own gear, that they learn how to use it, and that they can walk away and make their own films. And we have a really great film industry here in Newfoundland. So we have tons of students who work in the film industry, even though we're a tiny program, and who work in broadcasting. And we have a few students who've done, like, we have a student who works for Industrial Light and Magic,
Oh.
and another one who's like a feature film actor. You guys would be familiar with. But probably my favorite tool is the Zoom H6. There's lots of great cameras. My phone is an amazing camera. I just made a film with it for a dance festival, experimental dancing puppet film, and it's easy to get great footage. It's not easy to get great sound.
Mm.
So this is my favorite tool. We own quite a few of them, and it's so easy to sync sound now, especially with Final Cut Pro X, and this just records beautiful sound. I have a number of really nice lavalier mics, and I have the shotgun attachment, and we have some short shotgun mics that we use with it as well. So we have a lot of options, and yeah, so that's my number one. It's not my number one item, the H6 by Zoom.
That's great. Erik, we'll go to you next. So just in terms of your toolkit, what are your go-tos? How long did it take you to sort of build that up? And how much time are you dedicating each year to sort of updating that, or making sure that you've got the best tools for your students to learn on?
The tools are a very interesting question for me, because if I led by myself, I would buy every equipment possible because I love equipment. I think it's fancy, it's awesome. I work in a private school, so sometimes budget helps, like this kind of horrible attitude. But I'm trying to, for years, I'm trying to avoid this as much as possible. And like Jami said, one of the best equipment that we have nowadays, the phone has amazing resolution. So for ages I've been using, I even went to check it out, the model exactly, the Canon Lagria G10, which is a camcorder. That the reason that when I used to buy camcorders, the main thing was does it have an input for microphone? Mm. Does it have allow me to change the focus, do depth of field in the lenses? That was the main idea for cameras. But then it's a pain in the neck nowadays to import this. So I kind of gave up a little bit the idea of those camcorders. So now I have some stages. So for my elective courses, that 9th to 10th grade, for example, they tend to use those old camcorders or their own phone. Especially, I tend to tell them to use their own phones. My IB classes, we use now the SLR cameras for the only reason that forces them to use prime lenses. I want them to understand the difference of a 35 millimeters to a 50 to a wide angle camera. So that's the reason that we have. In my school, we use the D70, and we have two top cameras that I tell is for the students who have to do why do I deserve to use this camera? So they have to kind of it's not a quiz, but they have to justify the reason. I don't charge rent, I charge reason behind. So they have to, I have a Canon 5D Mark III, and we just bought last year Pocket Cinema 4K from Blackmagic. In terms of software, I am a certified Final Cut Pro X. When I was at USC doing courses, we use Avid, but sincerely now I only use DaVinci Resolve for two basic reasons. First, in my school, the students have bring your own device. So I never know which computer they're using. Sometimes some have a super amazing gaming computer. The other one has a MacBook Air. So DaVinci Resolve works both on Mac and PC, and even Linux if I have a crazy one with a Linux laptop. And also it's free. So there's no problem with buying the software. If you ask about stability, there's no question. Final Cut is way more stable, but only works with Mac and costs 300 euros. If the student does not have a computer to run or stuff like this, I do have 3 editing stations in my class just in case. But for the 6 years that I'm in Paris, nobody ever used those stations. They prefer to edit on a laptop, even if the screen is way smaller. They prefer to suffer this there. In terms of your question, how long did it take to make the toolbox? If you're asking about hardware, what I do with my school, I do pilot programs. I buy one, show off to my administration how good it is, and then try to push forward later on. If you talk about like content in terms of like class and material, like platform like Celtx, for example, the tendency is the same. I test like with you guys. Can I use a little bit and show with 2 or 3 students? I pay 2 license to see it, then I test this. I normally do every end of year in the summer. I take like 3 or 4 days to review my curriculum and see what went right, what went wrong. And is that still part of the question? Am I going
Yeah,
too long?
no, that's definitely.
I'm Brazilian. I'm talking non-stop.
You're
And then
good.
like this, and I teach like my school, like international schools. We have like a multitude of backgrounds, so I tend to adapt my units according to what I have. For example, like when I was in Shanghai, 30% of my community were Korean, so I created a Korean like a new wave units like to serve like them, and was interesting to them to bring more information and so on. So it varies. I tend to do this now. For example, in IB, one of the films that was in the IB list for textual analysis is Moonlight. So I decided to, the last minute, to shuffle and add like a LGBTQ unit in my class. So I was even showing like Try Guys video talking about this and so on. So, and I'm very open when a student bring an idea to us to try to, just to not be like kind of too much academic on this aspect. Still, I am very heavy on the theory and analysis more than sometimes kind of 50-50 with the production itself.
Right. That's interesting. I love that you make them write an essay about why they deserve to use the, the camera. It's good motivation to improve their writing skills as well, and they're persuasive.
One camera for 30 students, they have to, why he deserves this camera for 3 days and the other does not, for example. So
Right, definitely. Anna, we'll move on to you. So just similar question, you know, how long has it taken you to sort of build your toolkit? What are the tools that you're using the most? And how do you update that? Do you do it yearly? Do you just kind of have these tried and trues that you go back to, that kind of?
Sure. So I inherited my program from the person who founded it, and he was very scrappy about starting a film program without very much money. And so a lot of cameras and equipment were donated or were got by like a single time grant or things like that. So the majority of what I inherited was like, oh, you have this Nikon camera, this Canon camera, a Sony camera, a lens that works with this thing, but not that thing. But, you know, it was a work of passion and love, and it was what we had. So I have focused on trying to build out more equipment that's the same. So I think the question I'm asking myself every time I do spend time thinking about new gear is, do I want to get something new, or do I want to add more of what I already have? And I have a lot of kids that work in teams on films, and it's helpful for them to be able to get their hands on equipment. And so for me, having more cameras versus having, you know, something newer and shiny has been the priority lately. One of the things that has been really helpful for me is the CTE program requires that you have an advisory board. And so I put together an advisory board when I started teaching at this school 4 years ago. And they're people who are experts at all different parts of filmmaking. You know, it turns out as a film teacher, you can't be an expert at everything. And so having those other people who can weigh in and say, hey, here's what I'm using, or here's this new thing that my company bought, you might want to try it out. That's been really helpful. I do update my equipment every year to some extent. And that's because CTE makes it possible through Perkins funding for teachers to have money for equipment. And then I also very actively apply for grants. And that's been another way that we've been able to get some large items.
Right. That's, wow.
I do have one more thing to say on this though, because I do think a big part of our toolkit is gear. But I think as a teacher, there's kind of another side to my toolkit that was much more difficult to attain, that took a lot more trial and error than getting on B&H. And that was thinking about how to teach the really difficult aspects of filmmaking. And so some of the things I feel like I've pulled together in my toolkit in that regard is thinking about how to teach kids to tell good stories. And that's a really complicated endeavor. It turns out even some professionals are terrible at it. And we see those movies every year in theaters still. But one of the pieces that I've really loved is there's a notebook that this guy, Seth Worley, made that's called the Story Clock Notebook. And it makes you think of a story as a circle in time and break down like the different aspects of the story and when they're happening. And his way of analyzing stories has been a really helpful tool for students to use when watching film and then when breaking down their own film. So I'll make sure that Derek gets the link to that.
Yes.
And then the other thing has been having students think about a film in terms of inquiry. My school that I teach at is built on the idea of inquiry, and students do projects that are started by their own curiosity. And I found that having students start a film project with a question instead of with a statement or something that they're trying to say with the film has helped to make their films much richer. So instead of a student making a film that starts as a statement like best friends are amazing, I have them start that with a question like, what does it mean to be best friends? And then the endeavor of making the film is striving to answer that question in some way. I think those two tools, if you will, have been really helpful in helping students make better films with whatever gear they have access to.
That's really great. I love that you're taking them right back to the story level and making sure that they really know how to tell a story. And yeah, definitely, like I said at the beginning, a toolkit isn't just hardware or software. It's sometimes just a really great resource, a book, a story you tell them even about your own experience can be part of your toolkit for sure. Really appreciate that answer. So we'll move on. We have a couple, maybe time for 2 more questions, maybe 1. I guess it depends on how thorough your answers are. So I wanted to ask you all, this is kind of a little bit of a fun question. If you were on a deserted island and had to teach your course right now, on this deserted island, miraculously, there are computers and internet, which you can't use to message for help to get you home, of course. What 4 tools, resources, books, etc. would you, if you had to pack for that deserted island? This is a strange question, but we'll go with it. What 4 tools or resources would you say were the core ones that you had to have with you in order to teach your course? And we'll start with Anna this time.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that when I'm thinking about things I would bring to a deserted island, maybe like other than sunscreen and bug spray, I recently shot a film in a very deserted area in my personal life and regretted not bringing the bug spray, so that one might make the list. But I think kind of the core things for me have been, I just added to the chat, like my students are using mirrorless cameras. I love that they're able to do photo and video on the same camera because we try to do both. I've really fallen in love with the Sony Alpha cameras, even though I spend just an inordinate amount of my life cleaning sensors, like much longer than I ever thought that I would, but here we are. Probably that. I've loved the Zoom H6. Also, I agree with everything Jami said about it. If you can get your kids to get good audio, it makes such a huge difference in the quality of the film. And I've really been loving the Osmo Pocket camera. I know Erik mentioned an Osmo as well. I've had a number of like large stabilizers like the Movi FreeFly and like different steady cams and stuff, like vests that kids wear. And, you know, they lose the Allen key and then they lose like the one little screw that holds the little thing together in like a field somewhere and they need to order another part. And I've just like, no more of those kinds of stabilizers, but I do love a good ability to do a flexible moving shot. So Erik held up the Osmo. It's a tiny but wonderfully powerful camera on a little stabilizer gimbal, and that would be one of my things.
That's really cool. I love that Erik's showing it right now. And I guess we'll go to you next, Erik, so you can show that off a little more if you want.
And actually, like what Anna said is like exactly the reason that I bought the Osmo. I had to put like a kind of a 8 pages justification for a Ronin M and everything else. First day that they used, they lost like the mount of the camera, which costs like €100 to buy. It said, okay, never, like nobody gonna use this anymore. And this here is like less than 300, and it's very hard to break. And trust me, my students, like the 9th graders, try, and it still works. And like Anna said, to give a movement to a shot like makes a super difference. But to the desert island, what I tell my students, there's only one thing more important than the camera, which is the tripods. I don't care if it's a cheap tripod or a heavy tripod, whatever. A tripod is better than you holding your phone or your camera. So a tripod for me is the essential thing. I tell my students that like sometimes even more important than the camera because there's no use for me of footage that goes like everywhere like this. So I would say a tripod. In the case, I would imagine that they would have their phones, the kids, even the desert island. So it would be the mount to put like the phone on the tripod. In my, like we have in my school, the Zoom also to record audio because like Jami and Anna, like audio, and I tell my students, a reason to you to see how audio is important, if you go on YouTube and your internet start getting slow, the audio stays pristine, the visual starts pixelating, it goes to 480, but you still listen everything beautiful. You don't listen like, it doesn't work like this. So because audio gives this professional feeling to the film. So I would say the H4n. And if I can cheat a little bit on the 4 items, I would love to have a little light kit. So that would be like kind of this portable kind of light kit that nowadays they have for YouTubers that you can clamp on the table, just to give an option to do like a high key, low key, and this minimal stuff, which also is not like you can find for 50 euros or even less on the Amazon, for example. So those will be my 4 technical items, I would say.
That's awesome. Thanks, Jami. Those are some really great product shout outs. Jami, how about yourself? So what 4 items would you take to your deserted island?
So I'm going to overlap, of course,
Yeah.
being last. Tripod is definitely on my list. You know, it's a foundational item. I think you can film as quickly with a tripod as you can without. You just have to, you know, learn how to move fast with it, how to, you know, level it, how to, you know, check your horizon or your, you know, your vertical lines if that's the strongest line. And, you know, an iPhone with a mount, absolutely. I mentioned my H6, and Josh Dempsey was mentioning the Rode lavalier microphone, which I love, and it's what I'm using right now. I have an XLR adapter to go into my recorder, my field recorder. But I'm going to add a 5th item as well, which, you know, I don't actually use in my classroom, but I do use it when I'm doing a lot of my own filming these days, which is my DJI Mavic Mini drone, which is, you know, if you're on a desert island, you got to get up there and you got to get a beautiful overhead shot, bird's eye view of your island, right?
Yeah.
And until the batteries die, I'll keep using that. So.
Yes, true. We won't have batteries on our deserted island. That's a great answer. Thanks, Jami. So we do have time for probably one more question before we go into sort of the community discussion. And picking up on what Anna mentioned earlier about having an advisory board that helps her kind of understand what resources she needs, and the fact that no one person can be an expert in everything. If you were mentoring a new instructor today, what advice would you give them about creating a classroom resource list and tool list? And we will start with Erik this time.
Okay, so like Anna said, just to get a little bit off the equipment and in terms of logic, like one of the beautiful things of the IB program for the diploma film is that like there's not demand a syllabus in the sense that any teacher can create the content that they want. So my first suggestion is like, don't stress too much that you have to teach this, and that. The idea is like, get something that you like, either a genre or like a director, a filmography or something. And then from there, you can literally explore everything. You can explore composition, you can explore like mise-en-scène, you can do everything from this element. So this facilitates a little bit on this aspect. The second part, on the part of like the course, mix as much as possible. In the beginning, I was super eager to do production. And I noticed that the students would like, it becomes more like kind of mechanical and would not get the understanding behind some decisions made. And then like after a while, I noticed, okay, it's better to do this blend of let's then analyze a scene. Let's like have some theory, understand what is the French New Wave, understand German Expressionism. And then you see, oh, this is horror, great. So I can use this. So mix like in my course, for example, I do with them cycles, which is a mix of, I have 1 day of theory, and then I have 2 days of lab, and then we have like a summative assessment. Either they have to film something or they have to do a presentation. That's in terms of like the soft part of the course. In terms of hardware, I wrote even to me here, like start cheap. My recommendation, knowing my administration, I work for profit school. I work for not for profit school, and either one, of course, the for-profit was way harder to buy equipment, but like either school, they, if you get the cheap equipment and you show some results, it's easier to you to go next and say, okay, now I need some lenses. Now I need some stuff. And like I said, the cheapest thing that you can buy, tripods and mounts. And the age 6, if you can, have the budget. If not, the H4n has an accessible price. Jami said about those microphones Rode. They are amazing, very easy to set up, very easy to use. So some sort of sound equipment, basic sound equipment, tripod, mounts. The students tend to have like the phones. If not, you can even buy secondhand phones without the SIM card, just to use as cameras, for example. That's what I would recommend. Right? If you have a little bit more budget, then something kind of like DJI Osmo Pocket is a great one. Shoots 4K, 24 frames per second, battery lasts long. I think Anna wrote on the chat, there's, of course, nothing is perfect. Low light is a disaster. So make sure that you have like a light, but in the desert island, beautiful sun, and I'm for real, I'm using for a beautiful light. So then like this is like, works like mine. So that's what I would recommend to, and again, don't stress too much. One tip from an editor, because like I love editing, you don't have to know all the tools. Don't think you are not a tech support. Like there's something that like when I give workshops for IB, the teacher, oh my goodness, what I get training for this? Of course, if you have the training helps, but I am an official trainer from like both Final Cut, and I never teach those software to my students. First, because in my case, teenagers, they are sponges, they absorb everything super fast. And if they go on YouTube, there's like 10,000 tutorials to whatever they want. What I do in class, I show the basic. Okay, here's how you import the footage, here's how you cut, here's how you organize, and here's how you deliver. And then what I sometimes, because IB requires some editing, I do some like 5 minutes tips. But don't stress that like, oh, they ask something I don't know. This is not at the end of the world. It happens all the time and it's super okay. Good excuse to everybody search together for the answer. That would be the...
Right. Yeah, one of the things I'm often surprised by when we're training instructors who are new to Celtx, you know, we always offer a training session, and a lot of them are really amazed that I tell them, your students can write into support if they have questions. But we very rarely get students right into support because, you know, they're young, they figure it out. There's not like, I remember when I first started using a computer, I was afraid that like I would burn the whole computer by hitting the wrong button or something like that. They've reached beyond that level, and then they're not afraid to try things out typically. Jami, similar question for yourself. So if you were mentoring a new instructor now, what advice would you give them about creating their classroom resource list, their tools, and just generally like starting in their program?
I think I've gone over equipment. So you know, I'd get them to find resources that they find really helpful in teaching how to make a film, and also you know, teach the foundational rules as a starting point. So like I always teach the rule of thirds, and I always tell my students that it's the first rule they should always consider in composition before deciding on framing their image a different way. So when they're starting out, that's always your first thought. Teach the 30-degree rule, the 180-degree rule. So the foundational rules of filmmaking. There's a reason why when we go to the Picasso Museum in Paris, that or at least it used to be this way. It's kind of changed a bit now, but used to go and used to see Picasso paintings in chronological order. And what you'd see is see paintings that look like they were done by an old master when he's like 17 or 18. He learned the fundamentals first before moving on. So I think that's really important. Because I've been teaching a lot of documentary filmmaking, and our CBC is our national broadcaster, and our local CBC station mentioned to us a few years ago that we weren't developing students that had the skills that they now need to work for the CBC. We used to do a lot of internships, and they hire a lot of our students. And so I'm sure this is the case for Anna and Erik. We constantly have to relearn this medium, and you really have to be open to that. I just shot a film in portrait mode the other day. Like, oh my God, and it's an experimental film. I'll give it that. But I did, and that was a decision I made, as the filmmaker. But something I use a lot as a tool are 60-second docs. I find they're great because they have every aspect of of filmmaking in them. They start with a great hook. They use music, they use subtitles, they use audio well, they tell great stories. They tell very diverse stories as well, dealing with all parts of society. And they use the upside down funnel storytelling method, which works great for social media, where you're getting your strong hook and staying with your strongest points as your story spreads out. So I find that is an excellent tool to give our students a model to think about. They can break away from that, but to certainly think about when they're making their first documentary films. And we're tending to make quite short documentary films these days again, because, and this is a real consideration, if for a program like mine where it's just students doing a few hours of classes. I have them making shorter films rather than longer films, so that they understand how much coverage they need to make a proper film. If we're doing a 60-second documentary, we're probably trying to get at least 30 usable shots, and we could use anywhere from 20 to 30 of them in the documentary. And so I'm trying to. I think it's better to work on short films if you're not in like a conservatory, and then to work on longer films. If you have the time, then build up to that. Absolutely.
That's great. That's good advice, especially for someone starting out. And yeah, like you said, those shorter films are just what's all over social media now too. So it helps them create content that people will be very interested in viewing, Anna, similar question for yourself. So what advice would you give to a new instructor about creating their classroom resource list, how to get started in teaching, and what tools they should be maybe looking at?
Yeah, I would just echo what Jami just said about lots of shorter films. I have my students for 3 years, and so this might apply to some of you and to others maybe not. But I find that around their 6th or 7th film, they actually begin to get what filmmaking is. And so the quicker I can get them to that 6th or 7th film, the sooner they're making a higher quality product in my class. So we crank out a lot of like 1 to 2 minute films, and that's very helpful. And then I just wanted to say heck yes to Erik on the don't teach every little button to press in whatever editing software you use. That is so boring. It is just so boring. I just want to die when I watch something like that. And so yes to giving kids the very basics. And adding to that, my hope is that my students will surpass me by the time they're done with my 3-year program. I am a jack of all trades, and that's what I'm trying to be, but some of them will niche, and there shouldn't be any fear of that. Like, hope that the kids will surpass you at things, and then let them teach the other kids how to do things. I think of it definitely like I'm running a production house, and I'm the manager, and these are my employees, and they better get good at things. As far as like thinking about big picture, if you're starting a new program or new class, I really like thinking in terms of backwards design. So when I started this program, I thought, what do I want my kid to be able to do? What do I want them to know? And what do I want them to understand at the end of 3 years? And then how can I break that down into accomplishable things to begin to measure how they're going to get to that place where I imagine them being at the end of their senior year? So if you're starting a new framework for a class, that might be helpful. Yes to bringing other people into your class, whether that's your board that you have and maybe they come into your class too, or now's a great time to have people Zoom into your class wherever they live because they're around. And sometimes I won't be the person that really connects creatively with a student. And I think I tried to definitely think of my work as not teaching film, but teaching students film. And so anything I can do to get them in front of the person that they might deeply connect with as an artist, or someone who might look or identify more the way that they do, is important because I'm only representing, a couple of intersections there. I try to keep one foot in the classroom and one foot in the industry. I think that helps me keep up on equipment and the way that things are going on sets these days and what's changing. So there's a little bit of a straddling two worlds there, I think. I also think of my class as an experiment. Every year is kind of a grand science experiment of like, I wonder if I did this, how it would turn out, and each year I probably keep about 40% of what I did and try some like 60% new the next year. And I would be bored out of my mind if I figured out how to do this. So I think it's that idea of continuing to keep trying new things and pivoting. I also don't watch a ton of films in my class. I do not teach film theory. It is more of a film production, but I find it's a huge time investment to watch a film with students. And it's not always the best way for them to learn to make films. So what I try to do is give them the tools to watch films critically. So I have a certain lesson that I teach where I break down what shots are and angles are and what cuts are. And we watch 1 minute of the opening of Breaking Bad and then 1 minute of these different openings of TV shows. And the kids have to yell out like wide shot, POV, the whole time it's happening. And then they come back and they're like, you've destroyed me. I'll never watch films the same way again. I'm sure many of you have this experience. And I think destroying kids in that way, which really is just taking them from being like a passive consumer of media to an active consumer, is the most powerful thing you can do to help them create. Is now all of their free time watching music videos and Netflix is part of your homework. And you didn't even have to assign it. And then lastly, I would say there are probably organizations in your community that you could partner with. And just like having a board or bringing in other people, this is a big endeavor. And whether it's someone who, owns a moving company and will let you borrow their box truck to drive gear to a location, or if it's someone who, actually teaches film classes to youth that you can get your kids in on the evenings. I think looking for those partnerships and people who care about your doing helps you feel like you're doing it with other people.
That's a great idea.
Like to say both like Jami and like Jami said about the Picasso reference, this is the like super rule of filmmaking that like every rule exists to be broken as long as you know why you're breaking it. So in my case, the students have to justify why it's not well composed and this kind of stuff, because then it's not just because they have a reason for that. And what Anna said is exactly what I tell my students the first day of class. If you came here to watch films, you are in the wrong class. We don't do this. The only film that we watch student films, and they always think it's a torture. And I say, perfect, do better than them then. Because of course, teenagers are always like judging the others. So they feel, oh, this is so bad, look at this. And you look, okay, perfect, do better. So that's like the challenge that I have with them. And also the same thing that Anna said about homework. I tell my students, that's actually a tip that all the teachers here on the chat, you are the best teacher that you have in your own school for one simple reason. What do you do on your free time? I research for my class. I doubt that the math teacher goes home and do equations to kind of practice and this kind of stuff, while like film teachers tend to watch everything that's possible, go to every festival that shows up, talk about film with everybody. So like that's like I joke with my students. And again, I tell my students, like Anna said, they're gonna be the worst people to watch film with, because they're gonna be analyzing, look how amazing this tracking shot, no cuts. They've seen no cuts on this stuff. So they'll be the worst people to watch films with. That's my goal by the end of the 2 years.
It's interesting. After I did my first film theory class, my friends said the same thing about me. They didn't like watching movies with me anymore. So you become a little bit annoying, I guess. Okay, so that we're going to clue up our sort of more formal side of this webinar today and move into community questions. And we did have one, Jami, referring to something that you had mentioned, the upside down funnel. One of our attendees was looking for some clarification on what that meant, if you don't mind giving a minute or so to that.
Sure. So the idea is just that you start with your most exciting points, your story points. So you hook them in and you try to hold on to them as long as possible. So the traditional, for example, documentary, a news story format is based on the fact that you have a captive audience and they're going to stay there for 2 minutes or for half an hour or for 2 hours. But with social media, you don't have a captive audience. People are flipping through. How do you get them to stop, thumbing and watch your documentary film, right? And so that's the idea with the funnel. You get them with a strong hook, and then you try to, reel them in as long as you can. And hopefully that's for the length of your film.
That's great. Thanks for clarifying that, Jami. And now we'll go ahead. Nicole, if you want to, I know you've got some questions there, I think, in the queue. So if you want to just unmute yourself, I'm going to mute myself so I'm not making any disturbance here, and we can start asking those questions.
Thanks, Dara. There's actually no questions in the Q&A right now. It's just some info from the chat earlier, the poll that you did. So if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask the co-hosts, I'd encourage you to write them in the Q&A now. If you'd like to say your question, you can raise your hand and I can unmute your mic, whichever really works for you. Okay, so we have our first question from Michelle. Go-to books or websites as resources. I don't know if anybody in particular wants to take this question first. Erik, I know your mic is unmuted there.
I have okay, very good question. Like the problem of books gets like, depends on the course. If it's a course like pre-college, like IB, yes, you have to have like a solid source list. So you have history of film, like a Bible, like Maher Cousins, like documentaries. So you have like some solid stuff. But normally for my electives, when I how can I say, I'm not so much like held accountable for, in the sense of I don't have to make them pass an exam or so on that goes beyond my class. I love podcasts. Podcasts is a great source. Like Roger Deakins have a podcast. Yesterday I was listening to the Director Guilds of America. They have a podcast, and was Judd Apatow talking about how to direct comedy. I love also those video essays, Every Frame a Painting, Nerd Writer, Lessons from the screenplay. So those are kind of like video essays that can be a good resource to you to debate mise-en-scène, composition, character arc. Lessons from a screenplay is awesome, like Anna said, about story, because sometimes we focus so much on the visuals, we forget that like you have to tell a story. One trick that I do with my class is that like kind of an icebreaker. Every class I do, we watch a trailer, either that's something that's coming out or something that like in the past, because it's a good way to us to get like, okay, tell me who's the protagonist, tell me what's the conflict. Oh, there's no conflict, so why are you gonna watch this film? No conflict. So try to help them. We have to have those basic, like we have an antagonist, you know. So normally the tendency is like, just be careful when you look online, that's from reliable sources. It's like, in case of like Lesson of a Screenplay, he's been analyzing scripts for a while, so it's someone that I feel that I can trust a little more, just to be not anybody or any video that you see and use in class, from my part.
No, that's perfect. I think that's great advice, absolutely, to check your sources and make sure that they're credible. Anna or Jami, did you have any other websites, go-to resources, books that you'd like to add to the list?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. No Film School is probably the website that I use the most, as far as like, it's just chock full of articles and resources that are pretty good. There's a book that's not super popular, but I really liked it, called Teaching the Art of Filmmaking. And it's by a woman named, what's her name? Karen Bennett. And she runs a film program at a middle school in LA. And it was just like the most practical book for someone that's teaching filmmaking, at least in a middle or high school. That was really helpful for me. Let's see, I think I wrote a couple other things down here. There's a guy on YouTube called D for Darius, and he has a lot of great, really short videos that are like punchy and quick cuts that the kids have liked. As far as books, honestly, there's so many books that I've loved reading. I tend to not assign like books to my students to read as much, but I'll pull excerpts. So when I teach editing, I use In the Blink of an Eye. Like, that's one of my favorite books for that. There's a massive textbook I'm looking at on my shelf called The Filmmaker's Handbook. That's like, I think maybe the Bible of our industry or something. And that's a good one to have around, but I tend to keep those more for myself. And when I go on spurts of feeling like reading technical stuff, I'll read those and then like just highlight passages.
For the IB film teachers that are online, like we have to do textual analysis, so we have to do the boring part of analyzing films. BFI, British Film Institute, they have little pocket books on films. So it's like 40 pages, only 50 pages, analyze the whole film. For example, my students did a mock on Ida, the Polish film. There's a little book about analyzing this. So if you really need a library in terms of books, because IB requires you to have some sort of like resource material, those little books are fairly cheap, and they have like 50, 70 books, like Bicycle Thieves, The Shining, and like all the films that at once showed up in the textual analysis list. You can find this there.
I have one more. I just found this. It's called screenplaysubs.com. And you can watch a film with the screenplay, like side by side. The screenplay automatically scrolls like while the film is playing. It's a party.
I love that tool. I've been using it to watch many, many films. And just watching the script on the side it's a trip, but it's a really good one. Yeah, it's useful. Jami, did you have anything to add there?
Not a lot. Like I was mentioning 60-second docs, and I use another similar one. I think maybe Great Big Docs. I can't quite remember the name of it. My library is in my office at the university, which I'm not really in much these days. But again, like Anna, I've used textbooks in my film classes at times, but I find ultimately they're very expensive, and students don't often buy them or read them. Our bookstore buys 50% of the books, but I have a large library myself that I I think the best advice for someone teaching this field is to read. Read all the books on filmmaking, and be a filmmaker. Get out there, realize how challenging it is, how technically challenging it can be, how easy it is to make mistakes, how to solve those mistakes, how to get clean audio rather than depending on post-production, editing yourself, being a camera operator, directing, doing all those things so that you know what your students are experiencing. Someone had asked about lighting. Do you want me to address that a little bit?
Absolutely. If you want to, go for it.
It's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest challenge. We can't really afford lights that we can't actually light up a classroom. So if we're shooting a film in a classroom, we can't properly light it. We have two RE kits with instruments that are 250 watts to 400 watts. Say four 400-watt instruments and 250, we can't properly illuminate a classroom with that. So that's a big challenge. So we have to make sure the spaces we shoot in are small. I think that ideally the direction to go if you're buying lighting equipment, I think nowadays is LEDs. And ideally getting a system that works with your camera batteries if possible. It's not always possible. And the big worry, of course, is that all lighting equipment is extremely fragile compared to the rest of the equipment and breaks down so quickly. It's amazing what students can try to take apart when you're looking the other way for 1 second. Like the dimmer, thinking a dimmer on a light is removable. They're supposed to undo a C-clamp, and they remove the C-clamp from the light instead of from the pipe, or whatever the case may be. So lighting is probably the most challenging part, but looking at LED lights, and I always buy LED lights that are color corrected for outdoors, because chances are you're probably going to be fighting against outdoor lighting from the windows, and I can just put a filter on it for the simulated tungsten halogen. So that's what I would recommend. Like buying a computer, whatever you can afford in the lighting realm, buy that. Erik was mentioning the little tiny LEDs. They're fantastic for close-ups and for lots of other things. And then just playing with the lights. Make sure there's lots of workshop time, so the students, put them in different scenarios where they're trying to light different things, different genres. If I'm doing film noir, I'm not going to use an LED, for example. I'm going to use red heads or peppers or whatever the case may be. But so then I want a sharp light, or even like a Lico if I can get my hands on one. But so yeah, it also depends on what you're shooting, of course. So, and black wrap, get lots of black wrap.
Nice, absolutely. Thank you, Jami, for answering that next question. Anna or Erik, did you have anything to add about lighting and teaching students how to properly light?
The only thing that I would add is just I tend to try to teach students stuff in the context of also there being an application that they're excited about. And so when I teach lighting, I usually teach it as part of a unit where they have to make a film that tells a story using like 4 different lighting setups or something. So like they have to have single source lighting, they have to have 3 source lighting, they have to have butterfly lighting or whatever. They like draw them out of a hat. And they have to use those 4 lighting scenarios to tell a story. And so, you know, it forces them to practice that. But I agree with everything that Jami said about, I think it's really one of the hardest things to teach. And personally, it's probably a weak spot for myself. So I have brought in a few other people to do demos, and I guess that helps. We can see the kids' films. Like the lights are on. So like that's generally a plus.
Absolutely. Eric, did you have something to add?
Like if for me, like the lighting is also complicated because normally I have large classes and teaching light with 22 kids in one classroom gets kind of like chaotic. So normally what I do with lights is normally when I teach horror or something like this, because then they can be extreme with the lights. So they I can kind of, then I start tuning down from this kind of like craziness. So normally what I do is I call a light lab. So I do a list and they have to do like, take a picture with the light set up, go from like low key, high key, like Halloween lights, like rim lights. So, and I have in my school kind of a kit that comes as a kind of a bag, aperture, like this brand that has like 3 lights and like that can work battery or powered, and the stands.
That's great, Eric. Thank you so much. And Anna, that was amazing as well. Jami, I don't know if you have anything, any of your own tips and tricks to add in terms of, you know, social distancing and online learning, and in kind of encouraging that collaboration or just teaching production in general online.
Well, someone who's an attendee mentioned a resource I'm going to check out, teaching film, media, screenwriting, and production online for COVID-19. Maybe whoever wrote that could just write it in chat again. So I'll check that out, see what that is. I think one of the most productive ways for an individual to learn filmmaking is to do every element of it. And so the years I make every student edit a project are always the better years. So student, you know, I'm going to just make students do the individual projects. They can enlist roommates. If they're in a bubble with their classmates, they can work together. But everyone is going to have to, you know, do every aspect of their project. And there's nothing better. If everyone has to, you know, record sound, if everyone has to film, do their own, you know, figure out their own lighting, do their own editing, do their own writing, then they're going to learn a lot more than if they're riding on the coattails of a student who went through, you know, Eric or Anna's program in high school and then is in my program in university. They're already good filmmakers, and you know, these students are just going to, you know, avoid the technology and not learn as much as they could.
A tip that I can give, like I suffer a lot, especially the production was disastrous for me to be like teaching online. Can you guys hear me? I don't know if it's okay, awesome. So it's, if you like give like very short films, because now it becomes individual work one way or the other. So I was using having groups, so I would correct only some films, and suddenly I start correcting like 73 films. So it became like hell on earth to me to be able to grade so many films at once. So because as soon as we went on quarantine, it was like 2 days in advance. So I thought, let's do a COVID quarantine like vlog. Then I have 5-minute stuff, which was like crazy. So if you can keep like 1 minute, 3 minutes tops, it's ideal, like in terms of production. What you can do is get like the general conventions. For example, do a horror film in your bedroom, do like a drama or something like this, just to them to practice like, and set like camera angles, changing like basic, because there will be the limitation, and you need to be understanding this aspect. Forget about the resolution, focus on the audio also, like record the audio in a way that actually you can listen, or go to the extreme, no audio, like do like just like cuts and shots, like practice the shots, like the proximities of the camera, close up, middle. So sometimes, for example, I tell them create like a death scene, where you don't see blood, you don't see the weapon, and it's all close-ups. You only have one wide shot. So that's, for example, that I do with my students. So they have to think about it and do a shot list. Try to keep everything small, because I think during quarantine, this is the best.
So if you do have any follow-up questions, please write it in the Q&A. And if we don't answer it, we'll probably ask one more question, but don't hesitate to pop all of your questions in that, and we'll try and get the answers for you from our co-hosts after the webinar is over. So one more question.
While the question is coming, just like one more resource, someone said the Facebook, we have a Facebook group for the IB Film teachers. So if by any chance you teach in IB Film, just posting on the chat there. There's a Facebook group also just for IB Film teachers, and that's a safe haven. There's no coordinator, there's no principal, it's just the teachers there. So we can share some content, lesson plans, and etc. Focus only on the IB Film teachers.
Amazing. Thanks, Erik. I'm sure that'll be really useful, and great place to network as well for teachers who have questions, and we'll probably continue to have questions as we try and navigate the world that we know now. So one last question from Laura. She said she missed the beginning of the session, so she's not sure of all of our co-host situations, but she's wondering how we work with students and administration to navigate the idea of school appropriate when it comes to producing film or watching films. Not really sure who would like to try their hand at that. Jami, go ahead.
So I'm in a university, so we don't have some of the same considerations that you would in a high school, but I do have parameters that I give them, and basically that there's no forms of bigotry. There's no, including homophobia. There's no, racism. That the students aren't making something that's going to be offensive to someone else. We're in an educational setting, and that's pretty reasonable guideline.
Absolutely, Jami. I think I would agree, but I'm not an instructor or teacher or a school administrator. So I'm not sure, Anna, Erik, if you have...
I can say like something. So it depends very much of I teach high school. So I'm way more limited than Jami on this aspect. So it really depends of like how your school approach. Like I was like lucky to teach in Rio, which like we are very informal. Paris, we are very artistic. And Shanghai was more complicated, like to teach there, like this. What I would recommend, like the IB rules, again, of going back to IB, by the way, and have nothing to do directly with IB, but the IB kind of set some rules that's interesting, at least you to have a logical backup. So the idea for high school, my students, where I tell them, can I show this film to an 8th grader? That it's funny, like the person asking this, because I just received it from the Facebook group from the IB teachers. My student wants to talk about sexual assault. What can I show on the film? And like, there's a very good question. You can use subjectivity approach, like in this case. If you show the action itself, would not be permitted. Depends. I know, for example, as an examiner, there are some like private Catholic schools, which absolutely nothing is permitted. Some Chinese schools, for example, they don't allow you to even say that Taiwan is a country. So it depends of like your environment on this. What I do to protect myself, like to avoid, I never had any problem for almost 20 years teaching film in class that I have any problem. When I went on like distance learning, that I sent a film to a student, I have 4 parents sending email telling me that Akira, that Japanese animation from Katsuhiro Otomo, was extremely inappropriate because show a set of breasts cartoon. Was not the violence, was not exploding heads, was nothing like this. And I even like, today? And then I went to check it out. Yeah, it's true. A movie from 1982, and I have to write to the parents, like, just so you know, in France, this movie is PG-12. Everywhere else but US is rated R. And besides that, IB recommends rated R films, like The Godfather and so on. So one thing that we teachers, we do at the beginning of the school year, we send a paper to the parents, letting them know, just so you are aware, we're probably going to show films that varies, like the censorship varies according to the country. And those movies are always for educational purpose. There is an explanation behind, but if by any chance your kid feels uncomfortable, you feel uncomfortable, please let us know, blah, blah. That's what I would recommend.
Absolutely. And that's kind of how my schools always functioned as well. Like they would just say, you know, if you think this is inappropriate, let us know and we can take it from there, kind of thing. And I don't know if you have anything else to add in navigating what is or is not school appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a part of the reason also why I don't show a ton of films in my class, because navigating this can be a little bit of a nightmare. I am very blessed to work at a school where my administrator is very much, you know, for teachers and for creativity and for pushing some boundaries and stuff like that. So I do think there have to be discussions with your administration about what they're comfortable with. But I do think sometimes students will want to make a film that I'm not really as much behind some of the content, or I allow them to use like the not as bad cuss words, but tell them not to use the really bad ones, you know? And my thing is I just won't post it on our school's channel. Like if they want to use the F word in their film and that's a decision that we've talked about and they feel like they have a compelling reason for why they have to use it. Okay, like you're a creator and you're learning, but I'm not going to put it on the channel. I'm not going to put it on Instagram. And I'm not going to submit it to film festivals. So mostly the guidelines that I've had are, you know, no like nudity or sex. I mean, that's never been a problem. No guns or violence. There are a lot of other stories you can make. None of the really bad curse words. And then echoing what Jami said, like nothing that would be offensive to people groups. And especially, I think there's a way to tell stories that address those things without being those things. And so we do try to walk that line. But I think that like this is such a good question to like continually wrestle with your class of like, why is this not appropriate or appropriate? And when students want to make something that maybe falls outside of that line, like, okay, let's rethink it. Let's rework it. You know, I think I've had some of my favorite conversations with kids wrestling with this. And when they graduate from my program and they're 18, they can go make anything they want. And I've taught them how, you know, for better or for worse. So I think there's that encouragement of like, you can do it when you're older.
Yeah, doing your older is the key, I think, answer, because I had 3 or 4 years ago, I have a student who really wanted to do this sexual assault film and was like hell on earth because she said that I was like limiting her creativity. I was discriminating because she was a woman and la 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 la. And then I told her like what Jami said, this is an educational institution, a private educational institution. The IB does not allow you to do this. Nobody allows you to do that. Please do that after school. Do that outside the school environment as your personal project. Upload to every festival you want. So remember, by the end, like you're the teacher, and if anything goes wrong, gonna go back to you. Like, so be aware of this. Like, you should not feel worried that am I being too strict and this kind of stuff, especially like what I would recommend, talk to your administration about this before saying a yes to a student who wants to do something that you is feeling uncomfortable with. Have a backup. I highly recommend you to have this, especially in private schools.
But I'm going to just add an addendum to that, is that, you know, you also have to be careful because, and Eric, I know this is not what you mean, but students should be allowed to tell their own stories. So if there's stories of, you know, homophobia, if they're Black Lives Matter stories, they should be allowed to tell those stories. Those are important stories to tell. But obviously, if they're white supremacists, that's a different story. You know, they can tell that story on their own time. But you know, we had someone teaching one of our documentary film courses a number of years ago that students felt was reacting negatively to some of their suggestions around like doing like documentaries on the local Drake Queen scene. So that becomes an issue. We should not be stopping them from expressing themselves in positive ways. It's only when it's bigotry or offensive to another human being.
I agree with that. And someone just added to the chat the idea of flagging content. That's something I've done with some of my students' films as well, is like just have them put something at the beginning that's like, this content may be triggering if blank, 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 you know, or this content includes these kinds of things, so that people can self-select if they feel comfortable watching that. I also have learned the hard way, as I'm sure many of you have as well, don't screen students' films in your class if you haven't watched them, because they sneak things in there that you don't know are going to be in there. And that's the day that your principal brings like 5 guests in to come see your class, you know? Please tell me I'm not the only one. But I always do try to watch students' films before I screen them. So if there's anything they, you know, sometimes it's just that they did not have the maturity to understand it wasn't appropriate, not because they're trying to be bad.
It's funny you say that, and because like I got screwed big time on this aspect, because when I arrived in Paris, I have a group of francophones, kids who spoke French, and they put like a bunch of cursing words in French that I didn't know, even though I was like an intermediate French speaker. So I showed this in my auditorium with all the students, and I have a nice little meeting with my principal afterwards. That was not appropriate for my 9th graders to watch, the guy cursing like in French to everybody to see. So yeah, I highly recommend you to make sure that, like, even if it's not your language, and the subtitles, don't trust the subtitles, because I asked them to put subtitles and was not what was being said that. So nowadays I have someone from that language to double check the films.
And it's good to do that, to screen them for technical reasons as well, just to make sure that they're actually going to play back the way they're supposed to when you have an audience there.
It's some really great anecdotes there, guys. Definitely, yeah, I think everyone's agreeing. Make sure you watch them first. I can imagine that there's some hairy situations when you don't. Thank you all for coming. Again, thank you to Jami, Erik, and Anna. This was a longer webinar than we usually run, but we definitely haven't run out of steam yet, and that's really great to see, and that's because of the great content that you're giving us here. So big thanks to all 3 of you. And obviously to Nicole and Junior for their help as well. Nicole did a great job running the Q&A, and Junior there in wrangling all of those chat messages. We will clue up now. Like I said, you will get the recording on Monday. If you have any colleagues, friends who you think would be interested in this, you can definitely forward on the recording to them. But as well, shortly after we send it out to everyone, it will also go up on our YouTube page and our blog. So you can always check those resources as well for those. Thank you everyone for attending, and we will hopefully see you next month at our next webinar.